Have you ever stopped to calculate the price you are paying for something you have never been able to see? Not the price of a debt, not the cost of a wrong decision, not the value of a missed opportunity. I am talking about a cost that doesn't appear on any bank statement, that doesn't have a due date, but that you pay every single day with interest without realizing it. This cost has a name. And it is directly linked to the distance between who you are today and who you know you could be. Most people believe that the chaos in their lives comes from the outside. From the economy. From the boss. From the relationship. From the city. From the government. And because they believe this, they spend years trying to reorganize the world around them while the real problem remains untouched, growing in silence, consuming energy, sabotaging result after result. You can change jobs, partners, cities, routines. If the disorder is internal, it goes right along with you in your suitcase. Napoleon Hill spent decades studying men who built fortunes and those who destroyed equally massive fortunes. And the conclusion that ran through his entire work was not about strategy, it was not about opportunity, it was not about talent. It was about something far more fundamental, the internal condition of the person taking action. He discovered that no external method works inside a disorganized mind. That no plan survives a character without a foundation. That the outside world is always a reflection of the inner state of the person inhabiting it. Philosophers reached the same conclusion 2,000 years earlier. One of them used to say that a man can conquer empires and still be the most miserable of slaves if he does not learn to govern himself first. Another stated that every disturbance you see out there begins as an ignored whisper in here. This video is not about habits. It is not about productivity. It is not a list of techniques for you to add to your routine and forget in 3 days. This video is a diagnosis. And after the diagnosis, a path. We are going to go down to the root of the problem before talking about a solution because that is exactly where all other methods fail. They start at the surface. Before continuing, write in the comments, I am ready to reorganize from the inside out. This phrase is not decoration. It is the first conscious act of your reconstruction. Practice 1. What you cannot see is costing you more than you imagine. There is a fundamental difference between the problem you see and the problem that is destroying you. What you see is the result. The account in the red, the strained relationship, the project that never gets off the ground, the constant feeling of being late for your own life. What is destroying you is what generated all of that, and what keeps generating it, invisibly because it was never named. Think of someone who has worked hard for years and stays in the same place. On the outside it looks like a lack of opportunity. On the inside, if you look carefully, you will find a pattern. Every time growth approaches, something sabotages it. An unnecessary conflict. An impulsive decision. An opportunity ignored due to fear disguised as prudence. This is not bad luck. It is an internal programming operating on autopilot. Napoleon Hill called this mechanism the enemy that lives within. He stated that the greatest force against human success is not competition, it is not a lack of resources, it is not the market. It is the undisciplined mind surrendered to its own currents. Get a piece of paper right now. Write at the top, what do I keep doing, thinking, or avoiding that is costing me results? Don't answer from your head. Write by hand without a filter whatever comes up. Give 3 minutes to this question. What you put on paper today might be the map of what you are going to dismantle throughout this video. Keep this paper. It will make more sense before the end. Because the invisible cost only stops growing when you finally decide to look at it. And now that you know the problem has a root, the next question is inevitable. Why does your mind still resist seeing this root? The answer lies in the next practice, and it is going to be uncomfortable. Practice 2. The comfort that is destroying you does not feel like discomfort. The greatest danger is not the bad situation that you recognize as bad. The greatest danger is the mediocre situation that you have learned to call normal. Acute discomfort screams. Mediocrity whispers. And the whisper is much more lethal because it doesn't trigger any alarms. A man wakes up every day with a vague feeling that life could be more. But the coffee is good, the bed was warm, the day begins, work consumes him, the night numbs him, and the vague feeling keeps being pushed to tomorrow, to next month, to next year. 10 years later, the vague feeling has turned into a heavy certainty that he can barely name. One of the great philosophers of antiquity described this state with terrifying precision. He said that the worst kind of slave is the one who loves his own chains because he has never felt them tighten. The chain of comfort does not tighten. It just keeps getting shorter, imperceptibly, until one day you realize you can no longer move. Napoleon Hill identified this pattern in hundreds of stories he studied. He called it the hypnosis of acceptance, the moment when the mind stops questioning and starts justifying. When you find yourself justifying why your current situation is acceptable without ever having chosen that situation, the hypnosis is already in place. Do this right now. Write down a sentence you repeat to yourself about why your life is the way it is. It could be something like, "It's just not the right time yet," or, "I don't have the conditions I need," or, "The people around me don't help me." Write your version. Then look at it and ask out loud, is this a conclusion based on facts, or is it an excuse that became a fact because I have been repeating it for too long? You don't need to answer me. You need to answer yourself. But recognizing the comfort that destroys is only the beginning, because there is something that feeds this comfort and needs to be disarmed before any progress. This is what the next practice will reveal. Practice 3. Your beliefs are deciding before you do. Before any conscious choice you make, there is a choice that has already been made for you by your internal patterns, by the conclusions you have drawn from life over the years and stored as absolute truths. These conclusions are your beliefs, and they do not ask for permission to act. Imagine a person who grew up seeing money be a cause for fighting, scarcity, and humiliation. This person can study finance, can earn more, can have the best intentions. But if internally money is associated with danger, the mind will create ways to get rid of it before the conscious mind even realizes what is happening. Not because the person is irresponsible, because the belief decided beforehand. Napoleon Hill used to say that the dominant thought of a mind eventually materializes in the external circumstances of that mind. Not as a metaphor, as a mechanism. What you believe about yourself, about what you deserve, about what is possible for someone like you, this set of silent certainties is what is building or destroying your results at this exact moment. One of the Stoic philosophers stated that it is not events that upset a man, but the judgments he makes about events. And those judgments come from beliefs. Change the judgment, change the experience. Change the belief, change the standard of living. Choose an area of your life right now where results are chronically below what you desire. Finances, health, relationships, career. Write that area on the paper. Underneath, complete this sentence without thinking too much. People like me usually. Whatever comes after this phrase is the belief operating. Read what you wrote. Is this sentence building you up or limiting you? Because it is acting one way or the other, regardless of whether you know it. You have identified what you believe. Now you need to understand what this pattern of beliefs does to your emotions at the moment of action. That is where the next practice comes in, because emotion without direction is energy that destroys instead of builds. Practice 4. Your emotions are either fuel or they are the fire. Emotion is not weakness. Emotion is strength. The problem is not feeling. The problem is letting the feeling decide instead of your consciousness. When emotion drives and reason is in the back seat, the destination is left up to impulse. And impulses do not build anything lasting. Think of someone who receives criticism at work. If emotion takes control, the response is defensive, the professional relationship deteriorates, and the learning opportunity is discarded. If consciousness takes control, the same criticism turns into information. Same situation. Two completely different results. The difference lies in who is in internal command. Napoleon Hill was categorical. Self-mastery is the rarest and most powerful skill a human being can develop. Not because emotions should be suppressed, but because they must be channeled. The same anger that destroys a relationship, when transformed into determination, can build a career. The same anxiety that paralyzes, when converted into focus, can generate extraordinary results. The Stoic philosophers developed daily practices for exactly this. Not to be cold or distant. To be free. Because the man who is controlled by his own emotions is not free, even if he seems intensely alive. Here is the exercise. Think of the last time you acted on emotional impulse and regretted it. It doesn't have to be something huge. A wrong tone of voice, a rushed decision, an unnecessary word. Write down what happened in 2 lines. Now write down what would have happened if you had inserted a 30-second pause before acting. This exercise is not to create guilt. It is for you to see, with clarity, the real cost of not having internal command. And to start training the pause before the next situation appears. You learn to pause before acting. But pausing without direction is stagnation. The next practice will give you the direction the pause needs to turn into real progress. Practice 5. Without a definite purpose, every wind is a headwind. A mind without a definite purpose does not stay still. It fills up with whatever appears first. Other people's urgencies, available distractions, old fears, others' opinions. The internal vacuum never remains empty. The question is what you let in to fill it. Napoleon Hill considered a definite purpose the starting point of all achievement. Not as a vague dream, but as a direction clear enough to guide daily decisions. When you know where you are going, every small choice has a criterion. When you don't know, every small choice is a gamble. Think of two men who wake up at 6 in the morning. One knows exactly why he is waking up early and what he is going to do with that time. The other wakes up early because he felt he should, without really knowing what for. In 6 months, the first one has built something. The second one gave up in the third week. One of the philosophers of antiquity used to say that a ship without a destination finds no favorable wind. The same energy, the same capacity, completely different results depending on whether there is a defined direction or not. Complete this sentence right now in a single statement without a draft. I am building. Whatever comes after these 3 words is your purpose operating or its absence revealing itself. If the sentence comes with clarity and energy, you have a direction. If it comes out vague, generic, or doesn't come at all, this is the most urgent work you have before any other practice in this video. You have a direction. Now comes something very few people understand about what keeps that direction from turning into a result. It is not a lack of effort. It is something much more specific, and the next practice will name it precisely. Practice 6. You don't have a discipline problem. You have an identity problem. Here is something nobody tells you about discipline. It doesn't fail due to a lack of willpower. It fails because the action you are trying to maintain contradicts who you believe you are. A man who deep down sees himself as a disorganized person will sabotage any organization system he creates. Not because he is weak. Because he is being consistent with the identity he carries. Think of a woman who tries to wake up early for months and fails every time. She thinks the problem is discipline. But the real problem is that, internally, she does not see herself as an early bird. That is not her identity. And the human mind will do anything to be consistent with the identity it stores, even if that consistency destroys the results the person wants. Napoleon Hill described this mechanism when speaking about the self-image as the mold that determines what fits and what doesn't fit into a person's life. You can try to force behaviors that do not fit into your current self-image, but they will leak through the holes of the mold. One of the Stoic philosophers used to say, "First tell yourself who you are, then do what that person does." The order matters. Identity before behavior. Not the other way around. The exercise is this. Write down 3 behaviors that you want to maintain but always abandon. Now, next to each one, write honestly, do I see myself as someone who does this? If the answer is no, you have found the real problem. The next question is not how to create more willpower. It is how to start building an identity that includes this behavior as a natural part of who you are. You understood that the problem wasn't willpower. It was the story you tell about yourself. And this story has a chapter that perhaps you have never examined. The next practice will open that chapter. Practice 7. The pattern that sabotages you has a creation date. Every behavior that limits you today was, at some point in the past, an intelligent solution to a problem you had at the time. The child who learned not to ask so as not to be rejected became the adult who doesn't know how to ask for help and lives overwhelmed. The teenager who learned not to stand out so as not to be a target became the professional who sabotages their own achievements the moment they get too big. The pattern did not come from nowhere. It was built as a protection. The problem is that the protection stayed but the original danger left. You grew up. Circumstances changed. But the internal system keeps running the same defense program, applying old solutions to problems that no longer exist, and creating new problems in the process. Napoleon Hill called this fixed habits of thought. Patterns that the mind repeats automatically not because they are useful but because they are familiar. And the familiar, even when destructive, offers an illusion of security that the constructive unfamiliar cannot yet offer. The Stoic philosophers practiced what they called the evening review. At the end of each day, they would mentally review where they had acted out of old habit instead of conscious choice. Not to punish themselves. To separate what was a reflex from what was a decision. The exercise is this. Identify a recurring pattern of yours that you cannot explain rationally. It could be avoiding conflict every time, or spending when you should save, or disappearing when things get too good. Now ask, when did I learn that this was the safest way to act? You don't need an immediate answer. Just ask the question with honesty. Because the pattern you do not examine keeps governing you without your permission. You started to examine what governs you beneath the surface. But there is a force that feeds these old patterns and operates even more silently. The next practice will reveal where it comes from. Practice 8. You become what you repeat to yourself in silence. There is a voice that never stops. It comments on every decision you make, every risk you consider, every achievement you reach. You have already heard it say, "Who do you think you are to want that?" Or, "That is not for people like you." Or, "You are going to try and you are going to fail like always." This voice is not your consciousness. It is the accumulation of everything that was repeated to you and that you, at some point, decided to repeat to yourself. Napoleon Hill was categorical throughout his work. The thought a man holds about himself with emotion and repetition eventually becomes that man's reality. Not as abstract philosophy. As a measurable mechanism. What you say to yourself in silence is building or destroying your life at this exact moment, while you watch this video. A woman who spends years repeating internally that she is not good enough will find evidence of that everywhere, even where it doesn't exist. She will interpret a compliment as condescension. She will see an opportunity as a trap. She will systematically create the reality that confirms what she already believes about herself. One of the Stoic philosophers practiced conscious replacement daily. Every time a destructive thought appeared, he would immediately replace it with a thought that represented who he chose to be. Not suppression. Active replacement. The exercise begins today and lasts for 7 days. Every time you catch yourself with a negative thought about yourself, write it down on a sheet of paper. Next to it, write the version that represents who you are deciding to become. You don't need to believe the new version immediately. Just write it. Repetition creates the groove. The groove becomes a path. The path becomes an identity. You started to change what you say to yourself. But there is something even more silent than this internal voice, and it might be erasing everything you are building. The next practice will reveal this saboteur. Practice 9. Your attention is the most valuable currency you have. And you are spending it without realizing it. Here is a fact that most people have never stopped to calculate. Where your attention goes, your energy goes with it. And where your energy goes, your results show up. This means that every time you give your attention to something that is not aligned with what you want to build, you are paying with the most expensive currency you have. Not with money. With your own life. Think of a man who spends 2 hours a day consuming content about scandals, controversies, and news that changes nothing in his life. That is 60 hours a month. More than 600 hours a year. This man will say he doesn't have time to build what he wants. And he will be right. He just won't know where the time went. Napoleon Hill used to say that concentration is the closest sibling to a definite desire. That without it, desire dissolves before creating traction. That a scattered mind is the easiest to divert from the path, and the hardest to recover when it gets lost. The Stoic philosophers called this guarding what is given passage through the mind. They understood that the mind is not a passive container that merely stores what enters. It is shaped by what enters. Every input is also an instruction. The exercise is this. During the next 48 hours, record at 3 points during the day where your attention was. Not what you planned to do. Where your attention actually went. At the end of the 48 hours, read the record and ask, is the sum of where my attention went bringing me closer to or moving me further away from who I want to be? The answer will be more revealing than any calendar analysis. You started to govern your attention. And now we reach the final practice, the one that seals everything that was built here and determines whether the other 9 will last or disappear in 2 weeks. Practice 10. Transformation doesn't happen when you learn. It happens when you decide not to go back. There is a specific moment that separates the people who change from those who try to change. It is not the moment they find the right information. It is not the moment they feel motivated. It is the moment they decide, with clarity and without negotiation, that they are no longer going to live the way they used to. Not as a promise. As a point of no return. Most attempts at change fail not from a lack of knowledge, not from a lack of method, not from a lack of will at the moment they were started. They fail because there was never a real decision. There was an attempt. And attempts allow for retreat. Decisions do not. A man who decides to quit smoking is at war with himself every time the craving appears. A man who has decided that he is no longer a smoker simply does not negotiate with the cigarette. The difference is not one of strength. It is of identity consolidated by a decision that is not reviewed. Napoleon Hill described this moment as the point of crystallization, when desire stops being a wanting and becomes a being. When transformation stops being something you chase and becomes something you are. No external method can produce this moment. It can only be created from within. One of the Stoic philosophers used to say, great changes are not necessary. A decision big enough to make small changes inevitable is necessary. The final exercise is this. Write on a separate sheet of paper a single-line statement that begins with, from today on, I am someone who. Complete it with the central transformation that this video activated in you. Not what you want to do. Who you decide to be. Keep this sheet together with the paper you wrote on in practice 1. Reread both tomorrow morning before anything else. This daily reading practice is what anchors the decision before the ordinary day tries to erase it. We have reached the end of this diagnosis. And if you made it this far, it is because you recognized something within what was said. The invisible cost you never calculated. The comfort you learned to call normal. The beliefs that decide before you do. The emotions that consume instead of build. The purpose that was missing to give criteria to choices. The identity that sabotaged discipline. The old patterns that still govern new decisions. The internal voice that repeats what no longer serves. The attention given without criteria to what doesn't build. And the absence of a real decision that anchors everything. These 10 practices are not 10 separate techniques. They are 10 layers of the same work, the work of reorganizing from the inside out. Because when the inside is in order, the outside begins to reflect that order. Not as a vague promise. As a direct and inevitable consequence. Napoleon Hill documented this. The philosophers lived this. And every man or woman who stopped trying to fix the world around them and started to govern their inner world found, on the other side of that work, a life that no longer needed to be explained to others because the results spoke for themselves. The transformation you seek doesn't begin when circumstances change. It began right now in this video if you allowed it. Write in the comments, I am governing my inside. This phrase is the declaration that you understood what is at stake and that you decided to play from a different place. If this video made sense to you, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey. And share it with someone you know is trying to fix the outside world without ever having looked inside. It might be the greatest gift you give that person today.